IVM.
When Karthik gets onto, or used to get onto Jet Airways, and they said something nice about his frequent flyer status, he felt good. How does that happen? That happens because they've done some basic CRM with some data and given you, a basic compliment. You check into a hotel that you've stayed at 55 times, and they ask you, "Oh, is this your first time, Mr. Karthik?" It annoys you. Why does it annoy you? Because you're like, man, you have my data. At least do me the courtesy of saying welcome back.
Hello and welcome to the Filter Coffee podcast. Today we have with us someone who's been an entrepreneur, an investor, an advisor, and multiple other things. But I think in the industry, he's probably known more for leading global business development for American Express back in the day, based in New York, and then being advisor and investor to multiple startups around the world, many of them curiously in the big data and the AI space. Anurag Banerjee is presently the founder of Quilt.AI, which probably has one of the most intriguing home pages that I've ever seen. The sentence, "human empathy at scale," sort of jumps out from the screen to you. We'll talk about that just in a bit. But welcome to the Filter Coffee podcast, Anurag.
Thanks, Karthik. I am really excited for today's chat.
How are you doing? How's the lockdown treating you?
We're technically on a circuit breaker, not a lockdown. That's the nomenclature Singapore is using, and I like that nomenclature. It is a lot kinder, definitely, and feels like, okay, I've got something to do here. I'm taking some kind of an action to pause this thing, as opposed to lockdown being inflicted on me. So the semiotics of the phrase are quite cool.
Trust Singapore to keep it simple, to keep it approachable and technically correct as well, right? Hey, great! Happy to know that all is well with you and your loved ones. I want to talk about Quilt.AI in just a bit, but I'm going to take advantage of the fact that I've known you for a few years now, and sort of go into your journey itself, right? And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but it is safe to say that while you've had a very, very diverse and colorful career, many of them have been in the quest for understanding human behavior, right? At least that is how I see it. And in that sense, if we look at the world of insights and what we have today available in terms of access to understanding human behavior, I feel it is fairly limited, even in a world where we're looking at an explosion of data. I feel that the insights that brands and governments and NGOs and even investors have access to is probably not really there. Would you agree with that hypothesis?
Yes, I think there's so much to know and so many nuances and variants. I think making a claim that you understand it is a wrong claim.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem is probably in the history of research itself, right? I think as a world and especially as a region, we've been used to sampling based research a lot, right? And I think I know you have a personal contempt towards that sort of a research methodology. But I think for the longest time, we've been measuring large human behavior, or rather large scale human behavior, with what we have access to, which is a very small sample. And of course, statistically, it does hold water. I think it also limits you and your understanding of that, right? How have you've seen the last 5-6 years, Anurag, in this space? Like, how have things changed for the better?
Well, I'm going to take a slight detour as I answer that question about samples, and it takes me back almost about 15 years. I was at American Express, and one of my large clients was this mammoth consulting company, and we were in the process of trying to win their business for them to use the American Express corporate card. And in that process, one really weird request came about at the last minute. And that request was that all their key partners be given a particular card of a particular status. And it was this weird emotional request because it was a card, it's a piece of plastic, you buy your plane miles with it, it got you some lounge access, but you would think that partners in consulting firms earning multi-million-dollar bonuses wouldn't get hung up on a small irrational type thing. And I remember being in this room and watching this argument between the lead partner who I was negotiating with and this other very powerful partner. And they'd spent about 30 years at the firm, wore great suits, actually had gone to the same undergrad college, different business schools, but had a very similar profile, and yet they were arguing completely differently on the merits or demerits of having this card that would give them a certain privilege, which felt, for men back then in their 50s, fairly irrational. So, human behavior is such an irrational space, and I just thought of that memory. But from there to the question on samples, I sit on about 17 different panels, and I've said this story to many friends, and I answer questions on those panels. On some panels, I'm a man, on some panels, I'm a woman. On some panels, I'm an 80-year-old. On some panels, I'm a mom of triplets, right? And I lie all the time. I make about $170, $180 a month on these panels. And I do it just to prove a point that there is no authenticity, there is widespread fraud, and I'm probably making some enemies as I'm saying this right now. But this is true. Like, you're welcome to come hang out with me as I take surveys about my coffee choices and my shampoo preferences, even though I'm perfectly bald. I obviously don't like the idea of these panels. I was speaking to somebody in Canada a few minutes ago about their contempt for panels and bias and all the things there. In the last 5-6 years, I think what's been nice is we've seen an explosion of data. So there's a lot more data, whether it's the big guys like Facebook and Google, all the programmatic guys, all the ad tech platforms, all the cookies. There's a lot of that. And I think there are other ways of looking at information. There's all the big social listening guys, though significantly shrinking over the last couple of years. So it's been nice to see alternatives to survey samples. I'm amazed as to how many brands still run a brand health tracker with that same survey question to a sample saying, have you seen an ad about my product? Would you buy it if you saw an ad? Did you buy it? Did you try it? I'm like, who speaks like that? Like, how can that be authentic? Anyway, I'm going to stop now, Karthik, before I get too carried away.
Right. I think therein lies, something about what you said. Therein lies really the problem, right? I think the way at least I see it is you have a lot of data, yes, and obviously, right? Because we have a lot more digital footprints, and but the concentration of data with certain platforms is pretty high. And the second also is none of these data, for the most part at least, really talk to each other, right? Because they're part of walled gardens. I think for me at least, and I know that we've been part of this journey now, and we've been talking about this for the longest time. To me, I think the real tipping point in this, or rather the inflection point in this, sort of happened when we started having access to social media conversations, right? I'm not just talking about what you search for, etc. But I think the moment we started listening to what people are saying on social media, then I think that gave a different perspective to this. Right? I think I'm also a great fan of the word listening itself. Right? I think most of the insights gathering exercises up until that point and that point being, just under a decade back, was very asking led, right? So I'm putting you, like you rightly said, I'm giving you a questionnaire in your hand or virtually, and I'm giving you the mask of a respondent, and that's not really the most comfortable or the most open space. Where from there you sort of cut to social listening, where you're expressing yourself in your own time without anyone having asked you a question. And that suddenly seems a more powerful sort of an insight, right? Would you probably say, that is probably the inflection point in terms of the data access that we have today?
I think so. I think, despite all the bad rap that social media statements get, is an extremely powerful way to get a glimpse into someone's life. It may be showcase truth, or it may be showboating, but it's still a truth, and it's an observed truth, which I like a lot.
Right. Yeah, I want to quickly bring the conversation to artificial intelligence, and I know that your most recent journey with Quilt.AI is in that area, and you guys are doing some extraordinary work in that area. But just to put this in perspective, I would love to hear where you think we are in this entire journey on artificial intelligence, right? I think many of the more popular, more visible facets of AI today, whether it is the chess playing engine, or whether it is the Siri or the Google Assistant that we see, all of them are what we will probably refer to as the narrow AI, right? Or artificial intelligence, which is created for a single purpose, right? And I think much of the conversation that is happening, which is in terms of displacement of jobs, etc., are all probably because of its ability to do things which are very, very repetitive in a very efficient manner, right? But honestly, would you probably say that we are at the infancy when it comes to artificial intelligence in terms of at least what is possible with this?
Of course, as a practitioner, that's a stretch. As somebody experimenting or dabbling in artificial intelligence, I think the limitations are extremely clear in the material. We're having an argument today at the office about how big a training set should be, what kind of confidence levels can you get using different kinds of training sets at different interpretations, different intervals. And there is just, in an exasperated moment, I told one of my engineers that my 6-year-old son is smarter than TensorFlow, the Google product. And that's not to offend Google or anything, but there is so much limitation and so much we still haven't figured out. I think there's, we're at the extreme infancy. Having said that, I don't worry about the job loss element, actually. I think the reverse is true. So if you think about, before social media was going to come and take away a lot of jobs. And, then you have social media marketers, social media marketing agencies. You've got, Gary Vaynerchuk. You've got people, thousands and thousands of people who now have jobs with the social media. The same thing with the automobile and the horse, right? There are more people employed in automobile factories back in the day than there were people looking after horses in stables. So people think of these as job takers, and the honest truth is, they're actually not. They're job creators. Sure, there'll be some displacement, and there will be pain felt, no question about it. But by and large, I would say, by several orders of magnitude, more jobs will be created using AI than will be taken away by AI in the next couple of decades.
Right. And when it comes to AI and the experiments you're doing with it, and of course you're being extremely modest about what you guys are doing there. So Quilt.AI seems like a very different rendition than what I've seen in this space, right? Like at the beginning of the conversation, I told the audience about, your homepage having these lines, human empathy at scale, sort of jump out. And the more one understands the kind of work that you do, there seems to be a huge twist, and I'm going to go ahead and call it AI for good, right? It seems to be the common thread across many different things that you do. But we'll get to that in a bit. How did Quilt.AI, how was the company born? What was that journey like?
So I was at odd ends in the middle of 2017. I was wrapping some work up and I wanted to build something. And I went back to 2009 when I commissioned research for the first time. And I was given a sample survey by a large company out of Chicago, which I didn't enjoy very much. But the inflection point actually was on a flight from Delhi to Patna in the process of adopting our son. And I was sitting next to a lady who works for this massive, big global philanthropy. And she was going to go speak to some teenage kids about sex, pregnancy, miscarriages, abortions, sexual-related health issues primarily. And then they were going to deploy, I think, $108 million based on those insights. And so I was trying to understand why they were only going to talk to 16 or 17 girls before they made a decision. And she said this very clearly. She's like, empathy comes from being with somebody and understanding them. And the proxy that I have, the empathy comes from understanding people at scale by seeing and understanding many things about them digitally to make for a better informed decision. And that's in the non-profit side. And on the for-profit side, as I was thinking about what to do, I had many friends who said, somehow in all this data lakes and data intensive world, we've lost track of the person who buys our stuff. Who is he? Who is she? What does he or she care about? Who are they as a person? If I met them at a coffee shop, what would I say to them? If I had a drink with them, what would our conversation be like? What do they like about us? What do they care about my brand? And somewhere this connective tissue seemed to have been torn, or didn't seem to have been used aggressively enough. So Quilt was born from the desire to create connective tissue and deeper understanding, and hence empathy for brands with their consumers, almost in an old-fashioned way, and for large nonprofits and philanthropies and bilaterals and multilaterals with their beneficiaries by taking advantage of the internet. Right? And that's where the premise of Quilt is. So we're a 50-50 company. 50% of our time and effort goes into working with large corporations who challenge us, keep us on our toes, and 50% of our time goes into trying to solve really complicated, intractable human problems with large foundations and philanthropies.
That seems both audacious and beautiful and the right thing to do all at the same time. But
it's a thin line between bravery and stupidity. So yeah, I'm right there.
Yeah, but more than anything else, it seems like probably one of the most worthwhile pursuits. Right? Like I've heard of organizations which are trying to walk the fine line, which is this balance between what they're doing from in a largely capitalist world and what they're doing from a larger good. But this seems like a wonderful interpretation of that challenge. And you also walk the talk a lot, is what I understand, Anurag. So coming to the specific piece of AI for good, right? What does that mean to you, and what's been your experience with that?
There are three focus areas on the AI for good, and I think we were extremely fortunate when The Economist wrote a piece about us and called us an AI for good company. So that's my propaganda slide. I flashed it everywhere. But on a day-to-day basis, what it means, is that there are three areas that I'm passionate about, along with my co-founder and my colleagues, and those are climate change. They are children's health, nutrition, and safety, and it's gender equity, specifically around teen pregnancies, teen health, adolescent health. That's that space. And so what we try and do there is we try and build casework in each of these spaces, and then we take them to funders. It's basically doing work before we have investment or a client. It's extensive business development, if you will. So I remember for the first time for one of our large clients, we essentially scanned all of Bihar in India and we gave them details on what a little over 700,000 teenage girls were talking about as it relates to abortion, as it relates to contraception, short-term contraception, everything from condoms to IUDs to injectables. I learned a lot in that process. But also you realize that, that some of the choices and discussions and the sheer amount of knowledge that is missing or is required and needed in this space, drove us to that work. So AI for Good is using the machines we have to process the data so that a philanthropy or a government may take a better decision. That's the purpose.
Any interesting projects you've done where the results have sort of surprised you, intrigued you?
One of our favorite pieces of work was on climate change in the UK before the elections. I won't share many details, but the thing that surprised me in that particular project was if you didn't experience climate change physically yourself, it honestly didn't matter if you were a believer, denier, or but if you had flooding, or if you saw a heat wave, or if you saw produce that didn't show up, or a lack of bird song, you suddenly knew, oh, this thing is real. So it's amazing how, as human beings, while there's a ton of evidence in so many things, we can still be tactile, even at different intellectual and education levels. I found that across all, that if they experienced it, they almost always believed that it didn't matter who they voted for. It didn't matter if they were right or left. And that blew my mind, right? Because I always thought there was some kind of a liberal conservative divide on this, and that's not true.
Yeah. As you talk about this, and I know you Quilt has done some extraordinary work in the area of sustainability and climate change. And thank you for reminding me about that article in The Economist. I think it was probably one of those articles post some of the work you've done in this space. I'm also equally, not bothered, but sort of intrigued about who has access to data, right? And we're, of course, living in the age of the post-Cambridge Analytica phase, right, so to say. What is, and I know that you've been associated with the area of big data and AI for the longest time. What is your take on governments and people from a position of power having access to this? I mean, I'm assuming that's both a good thing and a bad thing, but how do you see it?
Look, I mean, I think there is, that is, be controversial about it. I would say people worry too much about this in some shape or form because, your data exists in the ecosystem in some shape or form.
Yeah.
Historically, it's existed with the government. So whether you have the Social Security number in the US, or you have now your Aadhaar card number, your PAN number in India, and some combination thereof, right? Your address, and there are these patterns that existed from a governmental perspective, and then they got embedded into sort of commercial life. So when Karthik gets onto or used to get onto Jet Airways, and they said something nice about his frequent flyer status, he felt good. How does that happen? That happens because they've done some basic CRM with some data and given you, a basic compliment. You check into a hotel that you stayed at 55 times, and they ask you, oh, is this your first time, Mr. Karthik? It annoys you. Why does it annoy you? Because you're like, man, you have my data. At least do me the courtesy of saying welcome back. So I think the construct of data, and there's a data privacy and a value continuum. It shifts one way or the other every once in a while. So, it exists to provide value to us. And I'll give you my favorite data privacy story. In the early 2000s, I know you're a fan of New York. You go there to write sometimes. So I just started working at American Express, and on my first Friday, I showed up at a bar at 4 p.m. I had a job. I was like, this is amazing. And I bought a $3 beer and then another $2 beer. And I was just getting into baseball. I was like, man, here's a sport that is as statistically heavy as cricket is. And I was having this intense conversation with the barman. And so I was about a $7 or $8 bill, and I tipped him $10, and I felt great. I went home and slept. About a month and a half later, I'm back at the same bar, and I'm having a conversation, and the barman remembers me. We have this chat. So clearly, he knows something about me. And so he pours out an IPA, which I was into, I'll have you know, before IPAs became technically cool. And we're having this chat, and he says, "Don't worry, this one's, you know, I'll leave a tab open for you." I was like, "A tab? This feels like, you know, the mid-70s. How cool is that?" So fast forward 19 years, I still have a tab at Bubby's in Tribeca in New York. I'll go back and I clear it and I always have a tab going on. And that to me is such a cool story, because I gave up a piece of me from a privacy perspective to get value in a certain way. Now, has it been abused? Of course. Are there things being done with data that they shouldn't be done? Of course. But by and large, you know, you use Facebook, I use Facebook. It's a product. We get to do certain things with it. They've got to make money in some shape or form. We can take political stances on this, philosophical stances on this, but the truth is, you can't get a loan in the US without having a credit score. How do you get a credit score? You have to data for it. So my point is, should it be governed better? Yes. Should there be protocols put in place? Yes. Should regulation be ahead of the curve? Of course. But you can't live without sharing data in some shape or form. That existence is, you know, it didn't exist 50 years ago, so it's been accelerated today. But this is something I don't think people should fuss about.
Yeah, I mean, I say this very cautiously, but you know, to the large part, I completely agree with what you said, because I feel data privacy is I think it's a very broad brush that we use to paint everything. Right? I think it really has to be a little bit more nuanced than that. You know, I have people who write down their full phone numbers and addresses, you know, in Lucky Dips and at the visitors book in many different buildings that they go to during a day, and then worry about a cookie that is in their browser, whose function is to make sure that the content they're consuming is relevant to them.
Yeah, exactly.
So I feel in a world without any data, I think information and this targeting would be extremely ineffective, and I don't think that's a great place to be as well. And of course, you know, I say this very consciously about the perils of privacy as well. And of course, there has to be some level of consent in this. Hey, so this has been interesting, and you know, we wish you and everyone at Quilt a very safe and a successful rest of the year. But Anurag, we normally end the episode by asking our guest what he or she is listening to or watching or reading. In that, I'm going to take a little detour with you, because I know that, and I don't think this is really the AI cohort, but you have a great passion for poetry as well, isn't it?
Yeah, guilty.
Tell us a little bit more about that story. And I've heard of these legendary exchanges between you and a certain Vikram Seth. Tell us a little bit more about this side to you, which I don't think most people know.
You know, Vikram Seth is a soul-crushing human being, and I've never met him, but and I say this completely in jest. You know, several decades ago, like every other teenage Bengali boy, I pretended to write poetry, and my poetry was particularly bad. I think my parents humored it. I got published in a couple of newspapers here and there, but nothing of consequence. And Mr. Seth had just come out with this beautiful book called Golden Gate, which is this novel in verse. If you haven't read it, you should. It's iambic pentameter sonnets, really, really well done. And I was so taken up by it. I read the book, I think, 10 or 12 times. And then I wrote a poem, 6 sonnets worth, and a cover letter, and I posted it to Vikram Seth, I think to Random House. This is in the early 90s, I would say. And, off it went, snail mail, prior to my first Hotmail account even. And about a month and a half later, a letter shows up in scraggy handwriting, and it's this letter from Vikram Seth. which basically, the line that is sort of seared in my mind says, you have no rhyme. Rhythm by itself is not enough.
Good Lord.
But he goes on to say, you're a brave kid, and I wish you luck. Just don't write any more poetry. And so I haven't written anything. I mean, I was never very good, as I said at the very beginning. But I love reading it. I actually was reading his Beastly Tales book to my daughter a few evenings ago, and he's a clever writer. I think his verse is way better than his prose. But yeah, that's my brush with Vikram Seth. He doesn't even know I exist, I'm sure, but
that is some story. Hey, anything I know that you like me like to read multiple things at the same time. Anything you're reading that's interesting that you would like to suggest to this audience?
I read. I have ADD, so I read 4 or 5 books at the same time, and sometimes I complete them. So I'll give you three thoughts. One is in a book that my 10-year-old recommended called The Inquisitor's Tale by Adam Gitwitz. It's an interesting write-up of the Crusades, which is such a bloody period, but it's done beautifully from a children's perspective. Also has some interesting illustrations in there, but it's actually a good read for adults. I enjoyed that. And now I'm splitting my time. I think the last time you and I spoke, Karthik, we briefly talked about Shoe Dog. And I went back and I just, I pick up different pages and I read them. And I read the piece in Phil Knight's book about Steve Prefontaine, that runner, dying, and how it twisted his life completely upside down. And at the same time, I'm reading a book by this young kid who's no more, called Marina Keegan. It's a book called The Opposite of Loneliness. And it's extraordinarily powerful. I mean, she died at 21 in a car crash. The strength and the power of her writing is spectacular. So, yeah, that's and then I've got some other boring business books, but I think the Opposite of Loneliness would be a good recommendation.
That's a fascinating list. I'm going to check out a couple of them. But yeah, I do recommend I do remember that conversation on Shoe Dog. I just realized after we spoke that I bought this book in a discount sale, and I didn't realize up until recently that I actually bought, this of course is Phil Knight's memoir, the founder of Nike. I bought the Young Readers edition. Much of what I read these days is near and far political history. And given that, I really enjoyed the breeziness of the Young Readers edition of this book. But even in that, I got to say that I really thought it's a very well-written book, which memoirs very rarely are. Of course, there have been books like Open by Agassi, but most of the other memoirs are more about the anecdote and not so much about the writing. I really enjoy the writing in this one.
This is extraordinary. I mean, what a life to have traveled and done business in Japan, to be faced down with loans that are crazy, the U.S. government suing him for random import duties. I mean, just epic. And you're there with him. You're there with him in Japan in Mount Fuji. We're there in a small house, and then he goes running to clear his head. You see his fights with his wife. It's spectacular. I think I should read the book again. I think all of it.
Yes. Excellent. Hey, thank you so much for your recommendation, and thank you so much for sharing, the journey of Quilt.AI with us. I wish you and Quilt, the best of luck for the rest of the year. Stay safe, and thanks for your time.
Thanks, Karthik. It was a pleasure chatting with you again. Take care. Bye.
Cheers. So that was our show. If you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcasts.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We are at IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram. And if you want to reach out to me, I am _Karthik. That's Karthik with an H on Twitter. And filter_coffee. That's coffee with a K on Instagram.
I hope hope you enjoyed that show. We'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Paytm Money. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Guys, it's been a really, really cool week. We've had a ton of interesting stuff come out. We had an episode with Kunal Shah on Cyrus Says. We've had really stellar episodes on Pesa Vesa, Advertising is Dead, Filter Coffee Podcast, on Empowering Series, all over the place. Definitely do check it out. I'm sure you'll enjoy what's been going on this week. And thanks for listening, and we hope to catch you again next week.
Entertainment is like food for the brain. It's a window to culture and a great way to understand the world around us. The internet has changed what it means to be an entertainer, creating new storytellers with millions of fans. It has spawned a new breed, the story sellers, those behind the scenes creating the business for this ecosystem. They work with brands, platforms and channels who are keen to capitalize on an audience hungrier than ever for more stories. I'm Vineet Kanabar, and I have a ringside view to how stories are told and sold. On my show, I bring you creators, artists, executives, and marketers for a freewheeling conversation around the business of entertainment. Tune in to Storytellers and Story Sellers for personal stories, analysis, and criticism every Thursdays as I talk to the brightest minds telling or selling great stories today.